Welcome back to another A2 Flow podcast video here on the A2 Enrichment page. As always, Stephen and Marilyn bring you nothing but good vibes. And today, our guest is the lovely Ellen Speake. Speake, now, I love you. You already know that. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, first question I'd like to ask, what do you currently do for a living?
So I currently work for Mastery Charter Schools. I work with our full-time dual enrollment seniors. So they are high-achieving seniors from all of our campuses across the city of Philadelphia that opt to take all of their senior year classes at the Community College of Philadelphia. So I work as an academic advisor, supporting them in their college courses and how to navigate college classes and manage their time and advocate with professors and utilize resources on campus. And then I also am their college advisor. So I support their college application process, college research, essay writing, financial aid analysis, all of that good stuff.
Awesome. That is a lot. So, how long have you been doing this college advice? Well, pretty much your whole job for?
This is my second year in this role.
Awesome. And before that, were you doing anything else in an education field? Because it seemed like there's a connection there.
There certainly is. I was a teacher for 8 years at our West Philly campus. I taught a variety of grade levels there. I taught 8th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade, all in the English language arts field.
Awesome. So, what made you want to get into teaching? Was this something you always wanted to do as a kid growing up, or was this just something you found along the way?
Had a feeling you were going to ask that question. So I'm going to answer it in two parts. I have two sides to this answer. So I will say that I did want to be a teacher. As far back as I can remember, probably like first grade is my earliest memory of wanting to be a teacher. I had a whole schoolroom set up, like play schoolroom set up in my house. I was very committed to becoming a teacher. And then I will say that my decision to go into urban education developed probably around my junior year in high school, where I started becoming more familiar with systemic issues in our country and seeing education as more of a social justice issue. So urban ed and teaching in Philly was the ideal way for me to kind of blend my passions for systemic equity and teaching.
Awesome. And my last question before I pass it to Marilyn, where are you originally from, and how was life growing up from where you're originally from?
Yeah, I grew up in South Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia, about 20 minutes outside of the city, and about 5 minutes outside of Camden. But I grew up in a very affluent area, so very much in the suburbs of two major cities, very waspy, very white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, middle upper class, very little diversity. So very different than Philadelphia, obviously. Philly was always like the home city though. So after college, I graduated and immediately moved back to Philly and have no plans of leaving. So definitely a Philly girl, but grew up outside of the city and will never claim that I am from Philadelphia.
I respect it. All right, so I'll pass it on to Marilyn to ask you your next question.
Okay, but are you an Eagles fan though?
Absolutely, through and through. Even
that's the right answer.
they had and the mess that is right now, we stay strong.
All right, so on this show, we like to ask predominantly college students why they chose what college they wanted to go to. Now, for you, you knew that you had wanted to be a teacher. So did that impact your college decision at all?
Not too much. I was looking to go to a liberal arts school. So education was kind of within that anyway. So I wanted a small school. I wanted a liberal arts college. I actually preferred liberal arts because you can't major in education there. You have to major in something else because they're not a pre-professional type of school. So I appreciated the holistic approach to education, and that was something that I really believed in and wanted in my education. So while I wanted to be a teacher, I also wanted to be exposed to other disciplines. So that wasn't too much of a factor in my college search because I knew I could get that from a liberal arts school.
Yeah, definitely. Education, even for students at HU, HU is a predominantly STEM school, yet many students seek to eventually become educators in the various STEM fields that we offer. So very true, it's very versatile. Now, today is February 1st, and as I understand it, it is the first day of Black History Month. So, considering you are someone who's very aware of many of the systemic issues in our country, what did that look like for you bringing or teaching some of those things in the classroom from an English perspective?
Mm-hmm. I always was very grateful to be an English teacher because it naturally lends itself to lots of conversations. So I was lucky enough that my content area, I didn't have to work too hard to find a lot of those themes and reflections of our own society and what we were reading. So I think as an English teacher, it's really important to offer a diversity of text. So when I was teaching, we often referred to that as windows and mirrors. And I believe in that in any type of classroom. So you should be reading things that you can relate to and that reflect your own background and experiences. And then you should also be reading things that are drastically different from what you were exposed to. And there needs to be a balance of that. I was lucky enough to have a supervisor who also believed in that, to have other fellow English teachers who also believed in that, and we, collaborated a lot. I don't think that exists in a lot of different high schools. And so I think that's something that as a country, we can do a better job on. I also think that, you can play it safe and not have those hard conversations when you're talking about text. And then you can also, you can open up that world for students through the text too, and that can offer a lot of insight and reflection and exploration. So that was always, those conversations were always one of my favorite parts of teaching, when students kind of had these realizations of their own lives in the context of greater society.
Absolutely. It's definitely not an area that's brought into a lot of high schools. Speaking from experience, we weren't often encouraged to look for texts or books or any sort of material that was really in that realm, unfortunately. But since you have a lot of experience with that area, what are maybe some of your favorite book recommendations or places to look for?
Mm-hmm. So I have a couple. I will also say that one of the challenges I faced was that I was a white female teacher in front of a classroom full of Black and brown students. And so it was extremely important that I was aware of my own biases and my own interpretations of text. So while I might have interpreted the text one way, it could have been very different than what my students were going to interpret. So I had to constantly be kind of checking my own interpretation to consider like, well, am I just thinking this because of how I was brought up or my own experiences? And how might this change based on what my students are bringing to the text? So I will say that that kind of, shifts literature for myself too when I'm thinking of it through their lens. As far as recommendations go, I actually loved teaching Shakespeare. That was something that I didn't really expect to love so much, and is more traditional text. And the stories of Shakespeare are just so universal. And the way that kids, once they broke through the language barrier, and like really got into the stories. Always just made those plays come alive for me in a different way than when I read it just as a student, or just reading it on my own. To see it through their eyes was really exciting. So Shakespeare was one of my favorite things to teach. I also, The Great Gatsby is my favorite book. And every time I read it, I get something new out of it. I've read it so many times, and love it way more now than when I read it in high school. So I highly recommend people rereading that as they get older, because there's a new appreciation for the language and the story. And again, thinking about it in a different way than just this like American dream story. It's way more complex and deep. So I highly recommend rereading that. And then Toni Morrison, you can't really go wrong with her. So I love teaching The Bluest Eye as well. So many symbols in there, so many themes. That was also a great one.
Yeah, that last one I haven't heard of, so I'll have to check that out because I love reading.
It's deep and it's emotional, and you know, there's a lot of trauma in it, but it's a beautiful, beautiful text.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen, I think maybe we should start a book club. So if anyone listening or watching has their favorite books or any book recommendations, leave them down in the comments below. We'll also link these books.
There's a book club that's happening, I think on Instagram. The Instagram, it might be Well Read Black Girl, might be the handle. I can't quite remember because there's two that are doing it, but they were doing like a Toni Morrison book club month. So it was like picking one of her 3 most popular books and doing a book club on that. So Stephen, did you do Bluest Eye when I taught you? Did I teach you that one?
No, I think that was a different class you taught that one. I did all the Shakespeare's and The Great Gatsby.
Yeah. Yes, I always tell the students that Scotty Fitz is my boo. He's the author of Great Gatsby, and they can't hate it because they can't hate my boo. And I was like, you can't not like this book. I don't care if you don't tell me.
I remember these. I remember you always saying that, and then it was like always that like people were trying to say it, but like, no, we're not gonna say it.
Yep.
So that's how we ran about it.
Yes.
But Marilyn but you want to switch to me for the next set?
Yes, that was my transition.
Okay, I was like, I didn't want to cut you off or nothing. So also a fun fact for those at home. The reason why Speake asked me if I read these books is because she taught me. She taught me in my, and correct me if I'm wrong, Speake. Was it 10th grade or 11th?
It blurs together because I had your class for many years, but it varied when I taught which students. So I either had you in 11th. I probably had you in 11th. 10th grade, you might have had Mr. Nelson.
Yeah, yep. So 10th grade I had Nelson, you had 11th grade. So, I had the privilege of reading a lot of Shakespeare and trying to translate from old language to where we are. Well, not really old language, it's just broken English that I had to translate to real English. And it was really interesting to learn the themes that are coming in that. So, speaking on the topic of the classroom experience, I want to talk about COVID and its relation to the classroom experience. I wanted to get your opinion on, do you feel as though right now, and specifically we're focusing on Philadelphia, it's going pretty well in terms of online experience, like, or is it like one of those we can only do so much?
So I will say that my perspective is a little bit limited, since my students are taking classes at the community college. So I have a much stronger sense of the community college, and then just know anecdotally what's happening at like the secondary level, through friends. I think that COVID has forced us to really examine where we are with education, the inequities that are present in education. I think that, this is seen most significantly when the pandemic first started and we saw the limited access to technology, and kind of this scramble to get students laptops and Wi-Fi, and how the access can widen the gap that is already there. But I also think, you know, on the flip side, it's been a positive thing, because I do think that students needed to be more prepared for 21st century learning, and we're not getting that in traditional school. And so this has kind of forced a little bit of a acceleration in terms of being technologically aware. I think that I think there's just a lot of issues standing in the way of education. I think that happened pre-COVID and is happening in COVID as well. So when we're thinking about access to food, and when we're thinking about home situations, and how many people are at home, and who has to take care of the kids, and how many people are using internet at the same time, and I have a lot of students who are working, and because they have flexible schedules, can work more and make more and bring in more for the family, and it's very hard to discourage that for school when school is more flexible. So it begs us to ask the question, like, what is actually necessary? What's necessary for what students? How do those answers change? Do they change? Should they change based on populations that you're talking about? So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for innovation within the world of education. And there are a lot of obstacles outside of the world of education that are impacting that.
That is very true. And to add on to my next question, so specifically focusing on your kids in the community college, I wanted to ask, as their college advisor, I know the theme of college around this time is, you're trying to prepare, or at this point you're applied and now you're waiting. Do you feel as though students now, since of COVID, are feeling more like I should just wait a year off college so that they can save themselves the money and the stress of dealing with a college during a COVID situation where they're dealing with hybrid classes, they have online classes and all that stuff? Or do you feel as though they should still consider college if they truly desire it?
I can only speak from my experiences and perspectives, because I know some of my colleagues have different experiences. I have not found that too much with the students that I am working with. Most of them are still committed to whichever post-secondary plan they had before. I have a few students who have opted to continue at CCP. I don't know that that's necessarily like COVID related, or just when they started senior year and we start talking more about post-secondary plans seriously, that was just the path that suited them best. I think that, I also think there's a difference between student desires and family desires in some situations. So I think a lot of students are hopeful that things are going to be normal next year. And so, their plan is not going to be impacted too much by this. Whereas families, I think there are some that, are a little more skeptical about what next year is going to look like. And, also there's a distance between financial understanding. So when parents have this understanding of how much they can afford, and if that's going to be worth it, whereas they don't divulge that information to the student. So there's a little bit of that happening. I think that if we were I see it a little bit more with the students who started college this year and had to start in a pandemic, and the questioning and second guessing that happened at the end of last year. But again, at that point, they had gotten into their college. They were hopeful that it was going to be, the things were going to be normal. Now it's not, but they're already in it. They've already registered for classes, so they just keep going with it. I've had a couple students say, like, if we're going to stay virtual, I need a break from this, because I've been still in my home online. I'm supposed to be on a campus meeting new people, and I can't. So I do have some students in that situation, but for the most part, the students seem to still be on their plan. And I think something I've heard from other colleagues as well is just Philadelphia and a lot of like the social unrest that is happening, and just police brutality and violence, that there are some families that are like, I need my kid out of the city for their own safety. So that has shifted in some areas. Again, that's not really something I've experienced, but rather what I've heard from other college advisors in the network.
Mhm. I can definitely see the just the concept of getting the kids out of the city. Now for me, I went to Mastery Charter Premier Campus. It was good school. But my family knew that not the school area, but the area that I lived in was not the final destination. The final destination is wherever I wanted it to be. I currently now live in Harrisburg, so I can see that idea of wanting to just your kid to do better, but you also want your family to be in better position as well. So it's always like the giving back. But I do understand where some of those kids are coming from that they're telling their advisors that statement. And I do understand that for a lot of kids, college is an escape. I'm not saying that to sound negative. It's actually kind of a positive, depending on how you see it. So, 'cause a lot of kids don't have like a bed at home. So college gives them a bed. Not the greatest bed, but it's a bed. And you make good with what you got. So I really like the fact that there's kids who are still committed to going to college, even though the pandemic's looming and it's kind of on the side of it's about to almost getting to the point where it's over. So that's a good note. Um, so then my next question I'll ask before I pass it on to Marilyn if she has any more questions would be kind of on the rim of how do you manage, working with these kids and doing all this? Like, how did you manage all this in your head? How do you process this? Because you brought up a big point of mental health, and I wanted to know how you manage it
In a COVID world or just in general?
in general.
Yeah. I My mental health has definitely shifted in my current role. So when I was a teacher, it was not in the place that it is right now. So with teaching, and I was very goals oriented and driven, and I saw my job as a teacher, or I took my job as a teacher very seriously, and was very committed in accelerating reading growth for my students, and had very much a whatever it takes mindset. So I was going to do whatever it took to get my students to be where they needed to be. And that meant spending a lot of hours outside of the classroom, creating strong lesson plans, grading, giving feedback, evaluating data, making adjustments, and also trying to find ways to bring joy and fun into my classroom and motivate students. And teaching, between 90 to over 100 students is a lot. So I did that well for a few years. And then it started to take a toll on me, and I began, because I wasn't taking care of myself, I wasn't able to give my best self to my students. And so as much as I loved teaching and as good as I was at it, I knew that I needed to make a change to take care of myself, because if I wasn't taking care of myself, then I was not benefiting my students. I still really was passionate about access for the students and families in Philadelphia to quality education. I am really passionate about college post-secondary support for first generation students. So I really wanted to stay in this field, but be able to focus on myself a little bit more. So thankfully, this opportunity became available. And so I was able to shift into this role, which allows for more time for myself. So I'm working with less students. I just can set boundaries a little bit easier in this role. And there's a little bit less pressure in terms of like results versus as a teacher. There's a lot of pressure that I have 100% control over the results, which is not true, but that is the world that we live in, that teachers are fully responsible for the results. So in this role, it seems it's not as focused on me and is more about supporting and coaching students to be self-advocates and to be successful when they do leave. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of went off on a tangent there, but it was how I manage it. So yes, I had to change roles. I now have more of a schedule, can set boundaries. It's more of a manageable workload. And I am really way more committed to factoring in time for myself and doing things that I love and that are for me.
I mean, that little tangent kind of answered the question in a nutshell. So you were all good. It kind of gave us an idea of like, the stress that being a teacher can weigh on someone. Because on our show before we had a lot of people like teachers on the show, we had students talking about how they handled their stress and their mental health. And always, as anyone, if you're interested and you need some help, there are always mental health resources in the description down below. So please check them out. We really recommend them. But when it comes to mental health, we know that it weighs on people in a variety of different ways. College students, a lot of them don't like going out for help or asking when they need it because they're not comfortable with it. They're not used to it. So we always like to talk about it, see how people manage it so that if you don't feel like talking about it with someone, fine. Maybe whatever you learn from this video or whatever resources you look at down below, it helps you out in whatever method it can. So we always like to encourage that. With that being said, Marilyn, do you have any more questions you would like to ask? Speake.
Well, you talked a lot about how you handle your mental health, and I don't know if you run into this with your job now, but do you find yourself helping other students maybe manage their mental health at all in the middle of everything? And if you do you have any advice that you could hand out to our audience?
Yeah, it depends on the student. So I have students who are more comfortable sharing more with me, and when they do, that lends itself to more support. And I will say that like those students I tend to keep in touch with over the years, well after they've left me. But I would say that on a basic level, my support often looks like helping with time management and organization. So especially in this virtual world, students are getting very overwhelmed with, they're getting all these assignments at once and have to figure out how to spread them out or create their own schedules, which is very typical of college students. My students are still in high school, so they are used to having teachers break things down for them or give them constant reminders. And since they're not in the classroom and are taking college courses, they're now more on a college schedule. So the primary support is with the time management and prioritizing for students with their coursework. For other students, it's more about like a sleep schedule, getting help. Like if they asking for help is a big one. So a lot of times students will be like, oh, I didn't do well on this, or I don't know what to do. I don't know how to make it better. I don't know how to get a good grade. And so it's encouraging them to go get academic support or create relationships with professors. And also just kind of thinking about everybody as humans. And so that's a big one. Like sometimes I have to remind them that the professors are humans and don't know what they see and don't know what they're experiencing. So they have to open up about that in order to get that help that they need. And they usually are pretty pleasantly surprised with how smoothly it goes and how understanding professors are. I think they're afraid that the professors are going to just like reject them, and that doesn't always happen. So those are probably the two biggest supports I provide in my role.
Yeah, I feel like you're talking straight to me. Time management and sleep schedule.
And they're all things I work on myself. So a lot of times I'm sharing with students like things that I'm trying to do for myself. Like I show them my checklist. I'm like, I'm also like a night owl, and that is typical of college students. So I can relate on that level where I would much rather stay up late and then I sleep in and like everything's off. And I know how hard it is to like get on the right one. So I can absolutely relate with them. So that's helpful. Although, we're all struggling together. So.
Yeah, that is like exactly me. So I know it's great advice.
And I'm way older than you, and it's still a struggle. So.
Yeah, you're always gonna struggle with time management. You might not be like the most organized person, but you'll still struggle, and that's okay. Definitely make sure to reach out for help. Support systems are crucial in college, and it's even harder if it's like your freshman year and you haven't been able to be on campus. And I know because that's what my sister's going through. She is a freshman, she moved in, and then she moved out because all her classes were online. So definitely reach out to your professors. They're not scary.
I will also say, because you bring up this good point about like freshmen and not knowing anyone, and it's so much harder, and it really is because you're not in class to like build those relationships with professors. Even online, it's really hard to do that. So I will say, and this might go into like your next question. I know I get deal what you guys have planned, but I will say like, step out of your comfort zone. So I've been seeing, like I went to Gettysburg for undergrad, and so I follow them on Instagram, and I'm seeing how they're handling everything. And they have like all these virtual events, like virtual bingo, like virtual workouts and all that sort of thing. I was like, oh, that's like so awkward. But as a freshman, like just do it. Like just go to those things, because what else are you doing? You might as well play bingo, even if you're in your room by yourself. And like, strike up a conversation in the chat with like a classmate. It's so difficult because as a freshman, you have to step out of your comfort zone anyway. And in a virtual pandemic, weird world, it's like times 10. But the rewards are there, I promise. So do things that like might be weird or awkward or uncomfortable. Because at the end, like the worst thing that could happen is like, so like you were bored a little bit playing bingo. Like it's not really that big a deal. The best thing that could happen is you make a friend. So.
Yes, great advice. And find someone in your class too, especially if you're on Zoom and you can like see everybody. Pick somebody out, hit them up, say, hey, this class is weird. Let's get through it together. That's a great strategy. Well, that's all from me. Steven, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I'll close it out with two questions real quick. So first, Speake, what advice would you give to someone who wants to be a teacher?
It is the hardest, best job out there. Your first year is going to be incredibly challenging. But my biggest piece of advice is to keep showing up, because even on your worst days, showing up matters. And the kids see that even if they don't show it and they are just giving you a hard time, the fact that you are there for them to give a hard time to matters. So sometimes your best is just showing up, and that is okay.
And my last question I'll ask you is there anyone you want to give a special shout out to, thanks to end out our little podcast?
Ooh. Oh man, probably like so many. I have so many shout outs.
Go for it.
I mean, first, probably all of my former students. I have learned something from every single class that I've taught. Even the hardest classes I've taught, I have learned something. I have become a better person and a better teacher from every single student and every single class that I taught. So, I think that's a great thing about teaching too, is that you are always a learner as well, and should keep that at the forefront of your job. But my students are very, very special to me. So definitely a shout out to all my babies, all my kids. You're always my kids. And then I have had incredible mentors. And I was lucky enough to be at the same school for all 8 years that I was teaching. So had really strong relationships with my supervisors and my colleagues, people who I am still very close with today. So I just thank my team for supporting me and being there for me, and collaborating with me. And yeah, those are probably my two big shout outs.
Well, okay. With that being said, then Marilyn, would you take us out?
Thank you, everyone, for watching another episode of H2Flow Podcast. Today we heard from Speake. As always, I'm Marilyn, and this is Steven. And we'll have everything linked down below. And be sure to leave any book recommendations that you've been reading or feeling. Get those comments rolling. And thank you for watching. Have a great day.
Later, guys.